and they update it every year because the roads change. You know, they take away roads and add roads. So you can see it has every state in it. So I'll just do this. I'll just open it up to a state. Okay, here's Nevada. We have Nevada, and it's in alphabetical order. Nevada and then New Hampshire. So it has all the roads on there, and it has the grid boxes like we learned. Has A through N and 1 through 10. So actually, let's do this. Let's look up. Let's go to Maryland in the back. And let's see if we can find Westminster. Okay. So, Maryland. And then I'm going to go down and list all the towns. Westminster. I would find that on page 1100. Or is that right? No. Oh, it's the, what is that number? Oh wait, I must be in the population. Should I just have a seat and I'll let you guys teach the class?
Yeah.
Really? Oh, well, I'll just give you the test then.
No.
Because there will be a test. Alright, so Maryland, Westminster. I would find Westminster. Oh, you know what? Hold on. Westminster. Right here. B12 of Maryland. So go to Maryland. Okay, and then so here's Maryland. And then I'm going to go down to B and over to 12. So 12 is down here and B is up here, Westminster. So if any town you want to find, you can look it up in the back of the atlas and it'll tell you where to find it. You have to just follow the grid boxes. Okay, let's do a review. I have the picture without the words. So who can tell me the name of this right here? Lucas. Oasis. Good job. What's the name of these things over here? Micah.
No.
Yes. And right here at the base of the mountain where the river begins is Marissa. Remember where the river begins? Alex? No? The source. This is the source right here. And then the source flows into a contained body of water, a small contained body of water. This is easier than you think. Okay, close your books so that I want you to learn this. Yeah? Jensen?
It's a lake.
Lake. Yep. So the source forms a lake. And then the lake runs out to the, what is this? Braden.
Bay.
The bay. Good job. And then this little piece of land right here. Mason, what's this?
An island.
An island, right. Close your book. I want you paying attention to this. And then in between this right here, this small man-made opening from a body of water to another. What's that called, Dylan?
Canal.
Yes. And then, very good. So then here is a larger area where water flows from smaller body of water to a larger one. What's that called? Remember, Nicholas?
Channel.
Good. A channel. And then, what's a body of water called down here that's surrounded by 3 sides of water? Autumn. Thought you had your hand up.
You said
Land. Land surrounded by 3 sides of water. Peninsula, right. And then I have, let's see, what is this called right here? This called, Jaina. Yes. And then this one's easy. Logan, what's this called? A big body of water, but not as big as an ocean.
sea.
Yes. Okay, so now we have our Gulf, and what's this called right here? Right here. Mason?
A river mouth.
Yes, river mouth. All right, let's do one more, or let's do this one right here. This deposit of dirt that the river put there. What's that called? Jed? Hello?
I thought you were trying to do like upstream or downstream.
Well, no, but you're right. This is downstream because this is at the end. This is down, and this is would be the up. But what's this called, Lucas?
Delta.
Yes, this is a delta. And what is it called when you have 2 mountains and they form the V-shaped? What is that called? Everybody.
Valley.
Good job. The valley. Alright, so I'll turn it this way so you can look at the words if you need to. And let's go ahead and open your reading or your history book. We're going to read on page 100. So we're starting chapter 10, the American War for Independence. So remember, they were still under the rule of the king back in England. Even though they were in their own land, all by themselves, they still were ruled by England. So let's read about, and then you'll see on the timeline, you see how it, let's start back at the beginning. So we have Columbus discovers the New World. And then St. Augustine is the first permanent European settlement. And then we have Jamestown as the first permanent English settlement. That's in 1607. And then 13 years later, the Pilgrims come. Now, there's a big jump in time, and we get to the dark brown section, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be right in there. So we're in the 1700s now. The American War for Independence. Let's start with Lucas. Okay, and we'll go down the row and wrap around. Can you read for us?
With the close of the French and Indian War in 1763, England became the most powerful kingdom in the world. Many American colonists were proud to be a part of their mother country. England allowed her colonists in the New World much more freedom than France had allowed hers. The colonists of New France could not own homes or land. They could have any part in making their laws. English colonists would own their homes and lands, and they had a part in making their own laws.
Good. All right. Jed?
English colonists could
Though 3,000 miles.
through 3,000 miles of ocean separated England from her American colonies. The colonists were promised the same rights as the people in England had. This promise had made the colonists happy. Would the King of England ever dare to break it? The American colonies demand their rights as Englishmen. Money problems. England may have become the greatest power in the world also become very poor. She had fought 4 expensive wars with France. France and Spain still wished for a larger part of the New World. If they fought England, England wanted to be powerful enough to win. England must find a way to make money.
Okay, so even though England was powerful, she was poor. So they're going, and things are going pretty well right now with England and the colonies, right? They have the same freedoms, but do you think it's going to stay that way?
No.
Let's find out. Stamp Act, Braden.
At that time, King George III was King of England. He decided that the colonists themselves must pay for the protection that the English army had given them during the French and Indian War. This sounds fair, but remember, the colonists believed they were to have a part in making their own laws. This was part of the rights which Englishmen were supposed to have. King George put aside this promise. Then he told the British government to pass laws for the Americans to obey. The colonists had no part in making these laws.
Okay, so do you think the colonists were happy about these new laws? No, because they thought that they were free. They thought they could make their own laws. But the king changed his mind and came up with some new laws to get taxes so he could have some money. All right, Jaina. One law.
One law was known as the Stamp Act. Special stamps were to be sold by the British government to the American colonists. These stamps were really sealed. The law said that all newspapers, marriage certificates,
Almanacs.
almanacs, and other documents brought by the colonists had to have a seal or stamp placed on it. The colonists were to buy the stamps when they bought the paper. Each stamp was really a tax that the colonists had to pay. A tax is money that people pay to help run their government.
Okay, so now the king was putting laws on the colonists that he wasn't even putting on his own people in England. They were having extra laws and extra taxes. Okay, and Mason.
And we buy the stamp too.
No, in England, or page 102, you skipped a page.
In England, the people have representatives, men chosen by the people to make selections for them about the tax. The colonists in America had no representatives in England. They had no say in the taxes they had to pay. They believed that the laws of England said that the colonists were supposed to have a say in their taxes, but they believed they were supposed to have the rights of Englishmen. In their minds, King George was breaking the law of England as long as breaking his laws.
All right, so they had no representatives to kind of stick up for them and to speak for them. So now we have more problems. Dylan?
Some laws had been passed years before the colonists had never really had to obey them. Now the English government tried to force the colonists to follow them. Most colonists were hardworking. They grew crops such as tobacco, cotton, sugar, and indigo with hopes of selling the products to other countries, but England said no. You may not sell your products to any other country except England.
Except England.
The colonists were forced to accept the low prices that England offered them because they could not sell their products anywhere else. Some colonists made the cloth and began using it to make beautiful clothes.
You're right.
England told the colonists that they could make only enough clothes for their own families. Clothes made in one colony could not be sold in another colony. Where could a wealthy colonist be fine clothes? He had to order them from England.
Okay, so they were putting these laws on the colonists that didn't seem fair. The colonists were able to make all kinds of nice things, and they were going to sell them to other countries, but England said, no, you can only sell them to us. And you know what? We're not even going to pay you that much money for them. We're just going to give you a little bit of money. But you have no choice. You have to sell them only to us. And then they were making very nice cloth, and England said that they were not allowed to, they couldn't make it to sell, they could only sell it in their own colony, basically to their own families. So that's not very fair, is it? And they're all the way on the other side of the ocean, and they're making all these unfair rules and laws. Okay, Micah, read about iron. Okay, I need everybody to...
Iron was
Yes.
important to the colonists for many utensils, pots, and pans. Of that time were made of iron. England said the colonists could make their own iron, but were not allowed to make anything with iron. The colonists must sell their iron to England, where it would be made to things that the colonists needed.
Are you right?
Then English ships would take the iron products back to the colonies, where they would be sold for high prices. Who would get wealthy under such rules? Who would become poor? Since the colonists had no voice as to the price of their products, they were the ones to become poor. Such things would not happen to the people who lived in England, where had the colonists
Right.
rights as Englishmen gone. The king had little concern for the colonists in America except for the money he made from them. You can imagine how upset the colonists became when the Stamp Act was passed. The colonists decided not to buy the stamp.
Okay, read the next little...
If we buy stamps, the king will soon tax other things too, which would
Okay, so we see unfair laws that the king is passing. He's saying they can't sell their products to other countries. They can't, and now when they make the iron, they can't make anything out of the iron. They are only allowed to sell the iron back to England, and then England makes the stuff with the iron and then sells it to the colonists. That doesn't seem fair. So the colonists don't like these rules because they're becoming poor. And the king doesn't care. He just wants money so that he can become wealthy. All right, so Lucy, read about the colonists speaking out.
Although there were some colonists who lived in England, many colonists felt that England was treating them wrongly. Many from the 9 colonies decided to hold a meeting in New York. In this meeting, it was decided that the colonies should complain to the king. At last, the British government felt forced to drop the Stamp Act.
king was putting new taxes on lots of things that the colonists, they kind of needed to buy, right? I mean, tea and paper and paint and glass, those were things that they probably maybe couldn't make themselves, so they had to get it from somewhere. But the king said, well, we'll sell it to you, but you have to pay an extra tax. So, the Boston Massacre, Autumn.
The people of Boston, Massachusetts, grew very angry and restless at the new taxes. England sent soldiers to Boston to help keep the peace and force the colonists to obey. Because British soldiers wore redcoats, some colonists teased them and called them redcoats were lobsterbacks. One cold, snowy evening, a small mob began throwing things at British soldiers.
At a British soldier.
At a British soldier. Other British soldiers came running to stop the fight. Suddenly, without orders, and perhaps by accident, a gun was shot. In the confusion, more soldiers fired their guns. 5 colonists were killed, including
Crispus Attucks.
Attucks, a black patriot. Each side was partly to blame for this terrible mistake. The colonists were teasing, irritating, and threatening the British soldiers. The British soldiers fired without orders. The people of Boston angrily called this incident the Boston Massacre.
Massacre.
A massacre is the cruel killing of many people at one time. Preachers preached against what the British were doing, and many of the sermons were printed in
Pamphlet.
form so that many people could read them. As always, the ministers had a great influence on the people. England saw the tax on the glass, paint, paper, and tea was not worth all the trouble it was causing. All the taxes were dropped except one, because England wanted to show colonists that British government still had the right to tax the colonists. A small tax was still kept on tea. You can imagine that drink the colonists refused to buy from England. Tea.
Right, so the one drink, the one thing they were taxed on now, tea, and if you're from England, tea is a big deal. You have tea parties, you know, the Queen has her tea time. Tea is an important thing, but, so that's why the king thought, well, I'll tax their tea. But the colonists even refused to buy the tea because they didn't want to have this tax. They wanted to show the king that he couldn't make laws against them, especially unfair laws. All right, Noah, read about the Boston Tea Party.
3 years have passed since the Boston
Massacre.
Massacre. Most colonists still refuse to buy tea from England. The British government decided to force the colonists to accept the tea. Their ships loaded with tea sailed into Boston's harbor. On a chilly December night in 1773, about 50 colonists dressed up to look like Indians, carrying
Tomahawks.
They boarded the 3 ships.
Where there?
Where there were 342 chests of tea. Each chest was smashed open with a tomahawk and then thrown over the sides of the ships into the water. When they destroyed the last chest of tea, they quietly went back to their homes. This event became known as the Boston Tea Party. News of the Boston Tea Party spread quickly to the other colonies.
government saw no truth to the Boston Tea Party and passed harsh laws to punish the thousands of people in Boston, even though only 59 did the damage.
Logan? England sent more soldiers.
England sent soldiers to Boston, closed the harbor there, since no ships could sail in or out. The people of Boston had no way of buying supplies of food. The port of Boston shall stay closed until its people pay for the tea they destroyed. The British government said if the harbor remained closed, the people of Boston could starve to death. The other colonists soon heard of unfair laws forced upon the people of Boston. South Carolina sent gifts of food, Connecticut and New York sent herds of sheep and cattle. Other colonists also sent gifts. The England were able to keep the ships from sailing into Boston, but they couldn't keep other colonists from traveling over the New England Pass or hills to help the people of Boston.
Go ahead and finish it up.
How can we protect ourselves from these regulations of the government of England has no right to impose upon us? Each colony asked if one of the patriots suggested that
Representatives.
for each colony meet together in Philadelphia to decide what to do.
Okay, so do you feel like trouble stirring?
Yep.
Yeah, seems like it. I mean, England
England's evil.
is having all these unfair laws, and they tax the tea, and so the colonists, only 50 of them, and very peacefully, they did not hurt anybody. They did not destroy anything other than the tea, and they threw the tea into the water to say, hey, we're not buying this tea. We're not going to pay your taxes. So they threw it out. Well, that made England mad. So England closed the harbor, and then ships from England couldn't come to and from, and they couldn't bring food and other things for the colonists. But did the colonies, were they, what's the word?
About to quit?
Did they quit?
No.
No, they
Yeah,
just,
they were just like,
they said, you know what, we'll stick together, and the colonies from the south sent everything up to the north so that they could have food and other supplies. So, they're gonna talk about fighting back. So, yes.
That's pollution if you throw tea into the water.
No, not
But then you
tea.
have a
Tea is not pollution.
That's a tea with the box.
Tea is a natural thing.
The
So
box
it's
of
like
tea,
leaves
though.
that just got
The box.
crushed up and put.
Well, I don't know if they,
Okay.
I think they just like.
I think they dumped the tea out.
Yeah.
Each chest was smashed open with a tomahawk and then thrown over the sides of the ship into
See,
the
the
water.
chest was thrown into.
Well,
They
from the
just-
picture, it looks like they just dumped the tea. Oh
The
yeah, there are
picture's
boxes.
mine.
Okay, well,
Happy face.
okay. Let's see. Who was the King of England just before the War for Independence began?
George Whitfield.
King George III. What was the Boston Massacre?
Where people kept shooting.
British
Tell you what, okay, let me hear it, Logan.
People started to throw things at the English soldiers. So, on accident, the gun was shot and hit somebody, and then all the English soldiers started to shoot too, and without permission. It's British.
Right, so apologize to Logan.
British.
Okay. Yes. So, a fight between angry colonists and the British soldiers in which 5 Americans were killed. So, both were really at fault. Kind of like when you tease your brother or sister and then they hit you. Okay? You shouldn't have teased them and they shouldn't have hit you. But so you're both at fault. What was the Boston Tea Party? Autumn. Yes. It was an act of protest by American colonists. Mike, remove your pen. I'm giving you thousands of warnings today. An act of protest by American colonists who threw British tea into the Boston Harbor. Okay, now, we just started this chapter. However, I want you to go back to chapter 8. Go back to page 83. And let me ask you a couple questions and I'm going to give you a quiz. Okay, I know this is a little bit afterwards, but... Okay, so let's talk. This is about the Great Awakening. Alright, so who can tell me, let's see, who can tell me, what was the name of the Puritan preacher who was one of the first leaders of the Great Awakening? Remember his name? Nicholas?
John Edwards.
Very good. Jonathan Edwards. He was one of the first leaders of the Great Awakening. Who was the founder of the Methodist Church? And if you need, the brown box is on page 84. Who was the founder of the Methodist Church? Lucy? Yes, John Wesley. Think of it like this. Wesley is a W, starts with a W, and M is Methodist. So, Methodist Wesley. I don't know. That's how I would think of it. What was the name of David Brainer's faithful Indian helper? Do you remember the Indian who translated for him? Do you remember his name? Lucy? Yes, Tommy. And what was the name of the university in England where John and Charles Wesley studied?
Harvard.
Okay, let me call in someone now. Alex? No, not Harvard. Autumn? Oxford. Oxford. What was the name of George Whitefield's good friend? Remember, he's a famous person you know. What was his name?
Benjamin Franklin.
Yes, Benjamin Franklin. He was friends with George Whitefield. So did Benjamin Franklin hear the gospel? Yeah, he definitely heard the gospel. Now, I don't think there's a record of him accepting the gospel, but maybe he did. And then the American missionary to the Indians who died at a young age. Do you remember who that was, Marissa?
David Brainerd.
Yes, David Brainerd. Okay. Four more questions. What was the name of the spiritual revival that swept through the colonies between 1730 and 1760? Dylan. The spiritual revival that swept through the colonies. It's plain before your face on page 83. It was a spiritual revival. Revived means you bring something back to life, right? So a spiritual revival, you bring, what's that? The Great Awakening. Right. It was like you were waking up your spirit. Okay? Because before, people weren't saved. They were living like religious people, but they weren't saved. Okay. Whose preaching of the gospel affected all areas of American life? Mason.
Jonathan Edwards.
Okay. Okay, look. Well, somebody else. Yes, George Whitefield. Let me see here. Okay, so George Whitefield, he was from England, and he preached in the fields to people, and then he went to the jail, and he preached to people in the jail. And let's see. Trying to see. Okay, on page 87 it says, Whitefield's preaching of the gospel that each person needs to be saved affected all areas of American life. Okay, so it affected orphans, and it affected wealthy people, so all people in America. Okay, the colonists needed a revival because they had never done what? Jacob. Yes, they had never accepted Christ. Now, were they evil people and did really bad things? No, they were good people, but they had never been saved. So who? And then last question: who started America's first orphanage? Jana? George Whitefield did. Okay? So, I'm going to give you a quiz, and I just asked you all the questions off of it. So, keep your book open, if you want to page 84, and that lists a lot of the answers on there. Okay? Jed?